one of the first artists who was drawn to computers in the 1960s. You're one of the major pioneers. What was the reason for that?
When I started in 1959 doing art, I was an abstract expressionist. That means there were no rules, and that bothered me since the beginning, that you had to make 5 drawings or paintings to get one good one. And that somehow I could not accept, that art should be based on complete arbitrary luck. And I know, since I come from music, that if you have an idea in music, you can write it down. You can write a score and you can play that. And I thought there should be somehow a way of writing down what you want to do before you do it. And that problematic lingered for years in my mind, but I could not find any solution until I one day found by accident the literature of Max Bense. And Max Bense is a writer, a philosopher, and he wrote about art which should be very clear and logical. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do, but I didn't know how to do it. And it took me another few years to find out what he means by really absolute logical art. And I tried in my paintings to get, it became slowly geometric, but over the years a little bit a square here, a triangle there. And I always thought that's logical, but I immediately always realized that that's not logical. To be logical, the content has to be logical. Not what you do to draw a straight line is logical, but it doesn't make the painting logical. So it took me another few years until I met another person which was very important to me. That one was Mr. Pierre Barbeau in Paris. I lived at that time in Paris. And he was making music with a computer. And he, by talking to him, understood that is exactly what I'm looking for. To be able to write down what I want to do in a program in that way. So I started learning programming, but the problem was still to find a machine, because at that time a computer was big as a house. I mean, 2,000 square foot space filled with machines and hardware. You could not have that yourself. You have to find a place somewhere. And luckily, again, I found in Paris, because I watched television and saw they had a program on the meteorology in Paris. I went there and I asked if I could work there. And lo and behold, it worked, but not immediately. I had to write to the government and all sorts of things, but finally I got access to this machine, and suddenly I was in paradise, which was, at that time, no other artist had access to a computer. Personal computer wasn't invented yet. So I started working there for 11 years, every night. So to answer your question, why did I come to the computer? I came to the computer because of my intellectual philosophy and necessity. That means I wanted to do something in a certain way and had to go through this bottleneck of problems to finally find a way of expressing myself by writing programs.
So you said how you were introduced to the computer as a tool or as a medium to help you actually fulfill this idea of working logical and precise, exactly define the concept. Did you, for yourself, stop painting in a traditional way, or so did you actually make a decision just to concentrate on this, or was it more something fading over?
The moment I understood what I was doing by writing programs, it's like a one way, you can't go back anymore. I express myself with my instructions, which are algorithms, and I could not go back to freehand painting because it was like ridiculous. Why should I go there? I just left there. So any idea I had, I wrote a program to look how the idea looks like. So it was a complete straight path into the future, my own future, where I could not look back. I could not understand what I did before. It was too uncooked, you know. It was not clear.
So did you feel from the beginning that that you were actually accomplishing what you wanted with the computer? Did it take you some time, or did you feel that is exactly what I want to?
Well, I mean, at the beginning I didn't really know what I'm doing because I had to go like theoretically through an art school of my own. I had to relearn what I want to do with the machine. Because the question was not what the machine can do for me, it's what I can tell the machine. You know, I had to find a way to ask myself questions, what I want to do, and then give it to the machine to execute it. So in this sense, the machine was always my help. It was not my inspiration of finding something. It's my logic which expressed itself through the program, through the machine, and that result was the surprise to me too. Because you see, you can't think of anything completely through. You have a certain idea, even though you write a program, there are possibilities which come up you never have thought of. So every time you look at some program and you run 10 drawings, it's like an incredible shock to yourself because you never thought that this is possible in your own logic, that this can happen. So slowly my path narrowed to a certain direction what I want to do. And of course, since I come from music, music was my first idea that I write things down like in music. I made drawings which have a musical development, and everything was based on, let's say, on writing. After a few years, I suddenly realized that's too easy. I can write every day another program. There should be something more global to the whole thing. And again, I went back to thinking about music. What would I do in music now? And I realized that in music I have an instrument, and on that instrument I play. So would it be possible to invent a music instrument which does graphics? I mean, not a music instrument, but an instrument. So suddenly I had the idea of a cube. The cube is in itself a structure of 12 lines, and you can manipulate and play with it. And that worked. That idea was absolutely stunning. I studied the cube and developed certain rules with it, and it became a real, how would I say, an alphabet of my work. Of course, after a few years, with 12 lines, you're sort of limited. So I thought, okay, if I go one dimension higher, 4-dimensional cube, which is nothing else than 8 cubes into each other. So I have 8 times more possibilities to do something. And that worked again. I found incredible, interesting rules to develop out of this 8 cubes, or hypercube, or 4-dimensional cube, how you want to call it. And I realized that the higher I go in dimension, I mean, the word dimension I don't really like because it has nothing to do with a mystical dimension or things we don't understand. It's purely the mathematical system which amplifies in complexity the higher you go. So I went to 4, 5, 6, and every time I invented specific algorithms to do something in that dimensions, and I developed an incredible alphabet which lasts for the last 40 years. But I still don't see any reason why there should be something else. Then there's so much to do and so much to invent, because I'm not really interested in the structure as a total, like a mathematician would be. I'm interested in extracting certain things from that hypercubes and do something with these elements. And that I did by inventing what do you call a diagonal path through the structure. I mean, everybody knows what a diagonal is. If you have a square, there are 2 diagonals. But a diagonal path is if you go once through each dimension. So in a square you have two paths. So in a higher dimension, you go once through each dimension and you get an incredible structure of a line. And I worked for many years until today with this diagonal path. And in the new work, which I will show in your gallery next week, is also based on the diagonal path. And again, it comes back to the musical part that I have sections where the movement is slow or not at all, like a slideshow, or it becomes, how could I say, like a different sequence in music. So you can see that on the screen incredibly.
I want to go back to an aspect you just mentioned with a quick sentence, which I always find very interesting in dealing with digital art, and which I get asked by many people who are surprised to hear that. You mentioned it a little bit, that you write a program and you are surprised about the results which happen. That it still happens, that it surprises you, even you define all the rules and you define the whole system. You're surprised by the results and you can take it to go in a different direction or follow something more. What do you think? How is that possible?
Well, it's very easy to explain. If you want to go from Paris to Rome, let's say, you buy a ticket at a train station. So you know exactly where you start and where you will end, but you don't know what happens in between. You see, you sit in the train, there might be an accident, you might meet somebody, you might meet, who knows? So you have to compare it to this kind of development, that you have an idea, you develop it, but you don't know what will happen during the time it develops in its own logic in my program. So sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes something horrible, uninteresting comes out, that's possible, most of the time even. So if you have something interesting, you develop more into this direction, So when I did my first program, for example, since you want to go back to I was so proud that a machine drew a drawing of my thinking. And I walked around and all my friends in the galleries in Paris and showed, look, I didn't do it. and people got crazy, said, so why did you throw it out if you didn't do it? Why do you show it to me?
That you actually did.
They could not understand, and the resistance is slightly still nowadays, that people can't accept that something which is done through a machine has an aesthetic value. There is still a slight resistance, I can feel it sometimes.
But it still has surprises. That's the interesting aspect, which people don't see.
Too, but also the piece as itself, people sometimes, or a lot of times, can't accept it. They push it away because it's not. I don't know what to say, but they look for some imperfection. People, as human beings, like to say, the machine made an error. But they can't accept that the machine doesn't make an error. They're afraid, and this afraidness makes them push everything away.
Even still in the 60s and 70s, you met other artists, you knew other artists and musicians, and you just explained that you walked around and showed them the first results. How was the response from other artists regarding you now going into such a direction, which was at that time really very unusual?
Well, I started in a group. In the group de Vincennes, we all went to the lecture of Barbeau and got all collectively inspired and excited. And we started a group to discuss what can we do, how should we do it, and we tried to invite other people to talk. We invited, for example, Vera Molnar, who's talked for years already that she wants to do something with the computer, but she didn't do anything yet. She only theoretically threw dice. But all this was collecting information, what can we do? And we did not have a computer yet either. Even though Vincennes, they got a small computer, and my first programs I wrote in Vincennes. When I saw this program on the television and I found the meteorology place, I jumped out of this group and ran alone and had my own paradise somewhere else. So they continued too, but we had vaguely connections. We had shows one time, sometimes together, but the discussion sort of fell apart. We became like enemies in a friendly way, you know, because I had all the possibilities. I had the machine. Nobody had a machine. Nobody had a plotter, you know. And this guy, he has everything. So I got, you know, by definition, sort of people got jealous.
Yeah.
But we still made shows together and things like this. But I mean, how it goes, I pulled away and worked day and night and didn't care a thing about anybody else, what they do. And I worked and worked until suddenly 30 years are over.
So then this very important major show happened of yours at the museum in Paris. How did that come about when there was so much rejection?
Exactly, that was when I started working in the Meteorology Institute. The director of the museum, Moderne, Pierre Godibert, he heard about me from some other person, and he came and visited me. And he got so excited about this idea that he said, well, we'll do a show. And a year later, the famous show in 1971 happened. And that, retrospectively, that was the first show in the world,
I know.
in the museum, a one-man show about computer-generated art. So there were many shows before in galleries and this and that, but it was never in a museum a one-man show. So until nowadays, it's the historic first show in the world of computer art. And that too, I mean, a lot of things added together, but the art world still was not interested. The art world was always still refusing, no, that's machine work, nothing. Even at that show, they hardly could write a sentence in the newspapers about the show. Whereas the television came and was a big spectacle, it was fantastic, but the art magazines, computer now. When that went on for years, there was no way out. They just refused. And I immediately understood why. Because an art critic, normally he goes in a show and looks at something and invents his own world, what he thinks about this art. And suddenly he goes in an art show and there's art, he doesn't know what to say about it. He doesn't know how it was made, he doesn't know what's the content. He cannot just talk some mystical stuff about it, you know? So he gets crazy. So they refuse to talk about it. I understand them completely. I even feel pity for them because they had to go through the same school as I. They had to learn something, what programming is and so forth. And only nowadays they sort of get easy with this kind of stuff and talk about it. And because you see, the computer became so much part of everything that it's not even a big deal anymore. Why should the computer be doing something special? It becomes integrated. Your bicycle, anything, your car has 50 computers in it. Nobody asks, what is the computer there? And that's, you know. So in this sense, that helps. But in the art world is still sort of reluctant that they cannot really accept it. But they have to, they can't get around.
Well, so this went on for the last 30 years. Did you feel there was any kind of major changes?
Well,
or, I mean, recently we know that the computer is really a normal part of life. But
you see,
about 80s and 90s, what happened there?
I mean, when I started, I immediately knew that is what I want to do. And people would say that's not art, so that's their problem. It was never my problem. If it's not art for them, so it's no art for them. It is my work, and an artist doesn't wake up in the morning and say, today I make art, today I make no art. An artist works, and it becomes his work, and after many years of working, that's his art. And so was with me, that's why it never bothered me when people said, oh, that's crap and it's not art. And I just laughed and walked away, because that was my work, you know. So in this sense, I was always very strongly sure of myself, what I'm doing. And even nowadays, when I don't even talk about the computer, you know, in the sense. In the early 70s, there was a time when I couldn't even talk about the computer in a gallery, because people would walk out. So I said nothing. I said, it's my work. Until one day in a show at the Gallery Violet came, put his hand on my shoulder and said, I think you should work with a computer. So that's the kind of reaction I like, you know. But to tell people that's computer, that's not important, that's my art. How it's done, it doesn't matter if it's drawn with a pencil or with a computer or with painted with the legs or whatever. Anybody who does art presents something and that's his product. And my product, it's done differently than others, but that doesn't mean that it's different. It is my expression of what I'm thinking.
Great. So, do you feel in the last recent years, I mean, we have a new generation of critiques now. I just had a journalist a few days in the gallery, and she was around 30, and for her it was totally natural dealing with digital art. Yeah. She liked it, she has a different viewpoint about it, she wrote an article about twittering and art and so on and so on. Do you feel this younger generation relates to your kind of work in a different way? How do they perceive it?
Well, first of all, I don't even feel that I am a digital artist.
No, I'm not saying that you're a digital artist.
I understand, but I get pushed into the category of digital art. My approach is a completely different approach, or was a different approach. The young people don't write this kind of programs anymore. They wrote or write it differently, and they have different interests. So the negative part of the younger generation is that they think they have to recreate my art. There's a whole group of people all over the world, they rewrite or try to rewrite my programs. They say to learn, but I think it's a stupidity. It's not to learn. It's a wrong idea, because it's not my program which has to re-edit it for a new age. It's the result has to be preserved, you know. So there I don't agree with them. But on the other hand, I'm thrown with these young people together in one pool, and I see visually I don't fit really in there. I stick out a little bit, because if you're very sensitive, you can see that my thinking is a different thinking than their thinking.
Of course.
They look in a different direction than me.
I meant the actual reception of the artwork, like critiques or journalists or curators and so on, from the younger generation. Do you feel they have a better understanding of your work and can easily relate to it?
Well, I think they can easier relate to it now. They have not a big problem anymore. It is not that it's something so new that they don't know what this guy is doing. They got, photography took 100 years to be accepted too, you know. So after 50 years of computer art, I'm fine, you know. I was lucky all my life that, you see, at the beginning, it's the engineers who liked my work. I got invited on left and right to engineer schools and had shows and slideshows, and until I got scared. It's like, I want to do art, not engineer's pleasurement, you know. So I accidentally or by chance of, I don't know, more than 1,000, I met a gallery in Cologne, Gallery Teufel, and he was completely convinced of my work. He didn't care less if it was done by computer or not. He pulled me through the art scene, to any art fair, Basel Art Fair, all the art fairs, and he showed me, and I was really imposed on the art world until they had to write about me. And they couldn't get around anymore because I was in the art world. And I was lucky that I could go back to the art world like this, because otherwise I would have been some engineer's pleasurement, you know, sort of.
Yeah.
It's a danger in a way, but I saw the danger that I have to go back into the art world, otherwise I'm lost, you know.
Yeah. So you're working with hypercubes now for quite a while. I think now in the 11th or 12th dimension?
It's the new program, it chooses its dimension itself.
Oh, it chooses its own dimension?
Well, between 10 and 15, I mean it.
So you already explained why you don't think that it's not coming to an end anyway.
No, it's an open-ended idea which I don't even know where it leads to. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, but I know that I'm not gonna draw a landscape or something.
Yeah, well, okay.
But I tried up to 100 dimension, made drawings in 100 dimension. It didn't work well. I mean, it works technically, but it wasn't nothing visual interesting yet. But I see that I have a long way to go.
with a hypercube.
Yes.
So we're looking forward to that.
Well.
Thank you.
Okay.